Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible stories in intellectual history, a story about a young mathematician who walked into the economics department at Harvard in the 1930s and completely revolutionized how humanity understands money, markets, and economic behavior. His name was Paul Samuelson, and by the time he was done, he had literally rewritten the DNA of economic thought. But here's the kicker. He almost never became an economist at all. Picture this. It's 1935. The Great Depression is ravaging America. Traditional economic theories are crumbling as unemployment skyrockets and markets collapse. The old guard of economists are scratching their heads, unable to explain why their theories aren't working in the real world. Enter Paul Samuelson, a 20-year-old mathematical prodigy from Indiana who had initially planned to study mathematics. But during his undergraduate years at the University of Chicago, something extraordinary happened. He wandered into an economics lecture and had what he later described as an intellectual epiphany. Economics was a field where I could apply mathematical tools to understand human behavior and social problems, he would later write. But what he found wasn't a rigorous science. It was a collection of philosophical musings, anecdotes, and theories that couldn't be tested or proven. Samuelson looked at economics in 1935 and saw chaos. Economists were arguing about theories using pure logic and intuition. There were no mathematical models, no statistical testing, no way to verify if any of their ideas actually worked in practice. It was like trying to build rockets using only poetry and wishful thinking. And that's when this young genius decided to do something that would change everything. He was going to turn economics into a real science. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. Samuelson didn't just add math to economics. He fundamentally reimagined what economics could be. He saw patterns and relationships that no one else had seen before. His doctoral dissertation, completed at Harvard in 1941, was titled Foundations of Economic Analysis. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. This single document became the blueprint for modern economics. It was so revolutionary that it took the economics community years to fully understand what he had done. Here's the breakthrough that blew everyone's minds. Samuelson proved that you could use mathematical optimization techniques to understand how consumers make choices, how firms maximize profits, and how entire economies reach equilibrium. He showed that economic behavior, which had seemed random and unpredictable, actually followed mathematical laws. Think about that for a moment. Before Samuelson, economics was basically educated guessing. After Samuelson, it became a field where you could make predictions, test hypotheses, and build models that actually worked. But the genius of Samuelson wasn't just in the math. It was in how he thought about human behavior. He developed what became known as revealed preference theory. The idea was simple, but profound. Instead of trying to guess what people want or need, just observe what they actually choose when faced with real options. This seems obvious now, but in the 1940s, it was revolutionary. Economists had been debating for centuries about human nature and what drives people to make economic decisions. Samuelson said, "Forget the philosophy, just watch what people do." And this approach led to incredible breakthroughs. Samuelson's mathematical models could predict consumer behavior, explain price movements, and even forecast how entire economies would respond to policy changes. But here's where the story gets really interesting, and why Samuelson's work is more relevant today than ever before. In 1947, Samuelson published a textbook called simply Economics. This wasn't just any textbook. This book became the most influential economics textbook in history. It sold over 4 million copies and was translated into 41 languages. Millions of students learned economics from this single book. But what made it special wasn't just the content. It was how Samuelson explained complex economic concepts in ways that regular people could understand. He took the mathematical sophistication he had developed and made it accessible to everyone. The book introduced concepts that we now take for granted: supply and demand curves, the multiplier effect, the Phillips curve, and dozens of other tools that economists use every day. Before Samuelson, these were either unknown or explained in confusing, non-mathematical ways. Now here's where things get mind-blowing. Samuelson didn't just create modern economics, he predicted the future of economic policy with terrifying accuracy. In the 1960s, when most economists believed that governments could easily control inflation and unemployment, Samuelson was already warning about the limitations of Keynesian economics. He developed models showing that there would eventually be trade-offs between inflation and employment that policymakers couldn't avoid. This led to his work on what became known as the Phillips curve, the relationship between inflation and unemployment. When stagflation hit the 1970s, proving that you could have high inflation and high unemployment simultaneously, Samuelson's models were among the few that had predicted this possibility. But perhaps his most incredible achievement was in international trade theory. Samuelson proved mathematically that free trade, under certain conditions, would lead to economic benefits for all countries involved. His Samuelson-Stolper theorem became the mathematical foundation for modern globalization. Think about that. The global economy we live in today, with its complex supply chains, international financial markets, and trade agreements, was theoretically mapped out by Samuelson decades before it actually happened. And this is where the story becomes relevant to everyone watching this video. Samuelson's influence extends far beyond academic economics. His ideas shaped the policies that created the modern world. The Federal Reserve's approach to monetary policy, based on Samuelson's models, international trade agreements, built on his theoretical framework, the way governments think about fiscal policy during recessions, directly influenced by his work. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. Samuelson was also incredibly prescient about the limitations and dangers of his own mathematical approach to economics. In his later years, he warned that economics was becoming too obsessed with mathematical elegance and losing touch with real-world problems. He worried that economists were building models that were mathematically beautiful, but practically useless. Economics is not a hard science like physics, he would say. Human behavior is messy, and our models need to account for that messiness. This tension between mathematical rigor and real-world applicability is still the central debate in economics today, and it's a debate that Samuelson himself helped create. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Samuelson's legacy is how he thought about the role of economists in society. He believed that economists had a responsibility to use their knowledge to solve real problems and improve people's lives. During World War II, Samuelson worked for the government, applying his mathematical techniques to optimize resource allocation for the war effort. During the Cold War, he advised presidents on economic policy. Throughout his career, he wrote newspaper columns explaining economic issues to the general public. He understood that economics wasn't just an abstract academic discipline, it was a tool for understanding and improving the world. And this brings us to why Samuelson's story matters today, in our current economic moment. We're living through unprecedented economic challenges: technological disruption, climate change, inequality, financial instability. These are exactly the kinds of problems that require the mathematical rigor and real-world focus that Samuelson pioneered. Modern economists studying cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, behavioral economics, and environmental policy are all building on foundations that Samuelson laid. The tools he developed are being used to understand everything from social media markets to carbon pricing. But perhaps most importantly, Samuelson's approach, combining mathematical sophistication with practical problem-solving and clear communication, is exactly what we need to navigate the complex economic challenges of the 21st century. The next time you see a news report about inflation, unemployment, trade policy, or financial markets, remember that the frameworks being used to understand these issues were largely created by one brilliant mind who decided to bring mathematical rigor to the study of human economic behavior. Paul Samuelson didn't just create modern economics. He created the intellectual tools we use to understand the world we live in. And in a time when economic challenges seem more complex than ever, his legacy reminds us that rigorous thinking, clear communication, and practical problem-solving can genuinely change the world. That's the power of one person with the right ideas at the right time. Samuelson proved that intellectual work isn't just academic exercise, it's world-changing innovation. Thanks for watching, and remember, the economic world we live in was shaped by ideas, and ideas, as Samuelson proved, can be more powerful than armies. Disclaimer: this content is for educational purposes about economic history and should not be considered as financial or investment advice.